Thank you. Good evening, my dear brothers and sisters. I am Dr. Muruganathan, Governor, American College of Physicians. Takes pleasure and pride in welcoming you all for a very interesting masterclass webinar series on hypertension. Today is the first webinar. Of course, all of you would have received our program. The 10 webinars every week, Friday, Saturday. The program is here, which is attached for you. So kindly make a note of the dates. Every week, Friday, Saturday, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. You can see the program. Today is Indian epidemiology and classification. Then second is pathophysiology of hypertension primary and secondary on tomorrow, that is 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. The link is same link what you have used today, the same link you can use it tomorrow also. And then clinical examination and investigation on 4th September, ECG and echo in hypertension 5th September, management of hypertension, drugs, choices and combination 11th September, acute severe hypertension 12th September. Then difficult to control hypertension, hypertensive disorders in pregnancy 19th September. Hypertensive trials which change the practice on 25th September. The last webinar is Conquering the Silent Killer, Hypertension Clinics and Concept of Hypertensionologists on 26th September, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. We have also planned to do future program. I'll chart out the program. We'll give you the detailed program in 2-3 days time. Mostly we'll cover diabetic hypertension in special situation, newer drugs, research methodology, artificial intelligence. Okay, what is the purpose of this masterclass webinar series? You know, I was the one who was passionate about hypertension. Myself and Dr. Chenniyappan, Dr. Rajshekhar and all, we had a great discussion how to take this forward. It's a blessing in disguise in the COVID lockdown. Now it's easy for us. It's easy for us to meet. The purposes are: one, to teach and train the practitioners, to make physicians to take special interest in hypertension, to motivate physicians to do research activities on hypertension, to do more activities related to hypertension on 17th October, which is the World Hypertension Day, which is now postponed from May 17th to October 17th. So I want all of you to take active part on that day, to motivate physicians to upgrade their knowledge and skill to become hypertensionologists, to inspire group of physicians to join and organize Hypertension Center of Excellence and Institute of Hypertension. This is my dream, long pending dream. There is no such Hypertension Center of Excellence or Institute of Hypertension in every town. So I want that to be developed. Of course, this is my name. And I'm very happy to introduce the speaker. The star speaker is a legend and a great teacher, Dr. Chenniyappan. He's the senior cardiologist from Trichy. He's the adjunct professor of Tamil Nadu, Dr. MGR Medical University. He's the founder, ECG and Echo Club of Trichy. He's a multiple gold medalist and has won numerous awards throughout his illustrious academic and medical careers. He's a recipient of Best Doctor Award in the year 2011, 2012, and 2013, and recipient of Gold Medal from Association of Chest Physicians, instrumental in conducting various clinical skills trials like CREATE, OASIS 5, OASIS 6, POISE, and CLARIFY. He is the master teacher, has various publications in nationals and internationals index journals. He is a very popular teacher. He has visited almost all the medical colleges, and most of the postgraduates know him very well, and they have a great fan circle for Chenniyappan. And Dr. K. Pancholia is the cardiologist and HOD Medicine Clinical Preventive Cardiologist, Arian Hospital, RC Indore. He was the organizing secretary of first CSI Heart Failure Conference, recipient of BC Roy Award and Charak Award by MPIMA. recipient of Excellence in Cardiology Awards by National IMA, recipient of Special Award by Association of American Cardiologists of Indian Origin in Chicago, speaker in WCC 2014 Melbourne, 2016 Mexico, and 2018 Dubai, and speaker in ESC Congress London 2015, ex-associate editor Indian Heart Journal, currently convener of RHD Council of CSI, regularly writing chapters in the textbook of cardiology and cardiology updates. Another interesting personality and academic professor, we call him as WhatsApp professor. He's a treasurer of ACP India chapter. He's a senior consultant physician and diabetologist, Heart and Diabetic Therapy Center, Kumbakonam. Kumbakonam is a pilgrimage center in Tamil Nadu. Academic, he's published many papers in medical journals and written chapters for Textbook of Medicine, API, Hypertension Society of India. Written book on mnemonics in medicine, 3 editions. Section editor, Yearbook of Medicine 2018, 19, and many other multiple books. Delivered many lectures in API and IMA, faculty in many national and international events. Reward Teacher Award by East Zone API Assam, Best Physician Award 2018 by Gulbarga College, Best Doctor Award by Tamil Nadu Government and Doctors Day Award from State IMA, Mary John Award from USA for Professional Excellence, Faculty of Cardiodiabetic Course, President Clinical Cardiodiabetic Society, Editor-in-Chief, International Journal of Cardiology, and he is also a master teacher. Dr. Waqar Ahmed is the Governor of American College of Physicians, Saudi Arabia. He is a cardiologist, founding member of Saudi Arabian Cardiovascular Intervention Society, Chairman Scientific Committee of Saudi Heart Association Annual Meeting, Chairman Scientific Committee of the Saudi Arabian Cardiovascular Intervention Society 2015, Member Board of the Gulf Intervention Society. Dr. Atul Bali is a nephrologist and a medical director, University of Virginia Dialysis at Farmville, Chair of Medicine Center Southside Community Hospital. He was also poster presentation judge during the last ACP virtual conference. Friends, you may wonder why so many panelists. You see, Dr. Chenniyappan is going to give a talk, and after that, whatever questions come in the chat box, these panelists will share. Not only that, I am going to request all the panelists on your behalf to join. We have created 3 WhatsApp groups, Hypertension Hits, Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. Of course, these groups are led by me and Dr. Rajshekhar. And these international faculties and the national faculties, experts, will be invited and requested them to join the WhatsApp group. So whenever you have any doubt on hypertension practice or hypertension updates, anything related to hypertension, if you don't have time here, we'll have the questions answered in your WhatsApp groups. So I request all of you to be very active in the WhatsApp group. And I am on behalf of all of you, I have the pleasure of inviting them to join our WhatsApp group and take part in the active discussion. So that is why I want to bring them here to introduce to you who is Dr. Atul, who is Dr. Waqar, Dr. Pancholia, and other people. So why it is important to control BP? You see the slide, the high blood pressure is the first cause for the most of the deaths. Whereas high fasting plasma glucose comes only here. If you see, high blood pressure kills nearly as many people worldwide each year as all infectious disease combined, 9.4 million. Whereas if you see, diabetes is only 1.4 million. So this is 9.4 and this is only 1.4. And I always call it as hypertension is a hemodynamic malignancy. Because of the hypertension, you can get heart failure, coronary heart disease, myocardial infarction, LVH, aortic aneurysm, peripheral vascular disease, retinopathy, chronic kidney disease, cerebral hemorrhage, and all vascular stroke. So that is why we call it as hemodynamic malignancy. So by controlling the hypertension, you can prevent all these complications. And our task on hand is to do screening and detect the hypertension early to prevent hypertension complications. Okay, what is the burden of hypertension in India? Nearly 20 crore Indians have hypertension. Another 20 crores are waiting to get hypertension. Of these, 25% of the rural and 42% of the urban Indians are only aware about the hypertension status. Many people are not aware that they have hypertension. Only a third of these known hypertensive subjects were under treatment. Some only one third is aware. Again, one third of that aware people only taking treatment, and only quarter of this treatment group had their BP under control. That is 1/10 of rural and 1/5 of urban population. And according to the Cure study, only 15.4% of the total hypertensive group had blood pressure control. Treatment and control were more common among men than women. What is the economic burden? If you see the annual income loss from non-communicable disease in India was 251 billion, and hypertension alone has contributed 43 billion, and it is a leading cause of hospitalization and outpatient visits, and it is a leading cause of absenteeism at workplace. Then I just want to give a small comparison of hypertension versus diabetes. The crude prevalence of diabetes and hypertension has been reported to be diabetes is 7.5% and the hypertension is 25.3% respectively. According to the Global Burden of Disease study in 2016, diabetes and hypertension accounted for 3.1 and 16.7 of total deaths in India respectively. So diabetes is 3.1, 5 times more because of due to hypertension. Moreover, diabetes accounted for 10 million disability adjusted life years, while hypertension accounted for 39.4 million dialysis in the same year. Hypertension accounts for 57% of all stroke mortality, 20% of all coronary artery disease, and 21% of peripheral vascular disease. Approximately 75% of adults with diabetes mellitus also present with hypertension, which could subsequently exacerbate the overall morbidity and mortality. Another fact is, any hypertensive patient has got tendency or a chance of developing diabetes 2.5 times more than normal. Same way, a diabetic has a tendency or a risk to develop hypertension 2 times more than a normal people. So the message is, any hypertension, you look for diabetes, any diabetes, periodically check for hypertension. Presently, there are more diabetologists in India, comparatively very few hypertension specialists. You also will know, if you see the number of diabetologists in your town, in your state, in your headquarters is much, much more than very few hypertension specialists. So we want to promote hypertension specialists, and we want everyone to focus on hypertension. The benefits of various interventions of cardiovascular events. By lowering HbA1c by 1%, you reduce 2.9 cardiovascular events. By lowering LDL cholesterol by 1 millimole, you reduce 8.2% cardiovascular events. And lowering systolic blood pressure by 4 milli, you reduce by 12.5 CV events by 200 patients. That is why we need more hypertensionologists. Okay, everybody says hypertension is a silent killer. But ladies and gentlemen, my brothers and sisters, we cannot be silent. We cannot be silent. We must make some noise and we must do something. In fact, myself and Chenyapan, about 7 years back, we started E-Hypertension Academy. We covered all the points of, basics of hypertension, and we have conducted so far more than 500 to 800 CMEs. And I also promoted home blood pressure monitoring, nearly 10,000 home blood pressure monitoring we could donate with the help of sponsors. And then we released Manual 1 hypertension volume, and then periodical hypertension beats newsletter we released. And then recently we released the hypertension manual, second edition. And this is very important, which I want to show. Every one of you are interested in hypertension, but unfortunately, please note, nobody does periodical calibration, and nobody has 3 size cups. If you go to any clinic, there'll be only 1 cup. So I request all of you, it's not very costly. So buy 3 sizes, different sizes for obese people, for thin people, for children, and also periodically you calibrate. So this is the dry home points for this. Buy 3 different sizes of BP cups tomorrow. Validate the BP apparatus. If you cannot validate, renew BP monitors periodically. After all, it's only 2,000, 3,000 rupees. When you can renew your automobile every 3 years, 6 lakhs, 8 lakhs of worth of car for 3 years, every 3 years, why can't we renew BP monitors periodically if you cannot validate? Promote home blood pressure monitoring. Actively participate in WhatsApp groups daily. Whatever doubts you have, please actively participate And whatever you come across a hypertensive patient, document, have a hypertension registry. Now start planning to start a hypertension clinic, focus on hypertension, and let us together reduce the economic burden and the disease burden by early detecting and controlling this silent killer. Let us join together and achieve global freedom from hypertension. Thank you for your patient hearing. Now I have great pleasure in welcoming the speaker, Dr. Chennappan, to present his slides. Over to Chennappan. Chennappan, ready?
Yes. Good evening, Dr. Muruganathan sir, respected faculty from our country and abroad, and extremely friendly delegates. And I thank Dr. Muruganathan sir for giving me the opportunity to start the first topic on this very important and interesting masterclass webinar series in hypertension. So first, I'm going to tell you about the classification of hypertension. So why should we classify hypertension? To know the severity according to the numbers, to know whether it is a curable hypertension or controllable hypertension. Some of the classification itself give you the basic pathophysiology of hypertension. When to start treatment, at what number or what stage of hypertension you have to start the drugs and adjust the drugs. Some of the classification will give you the prognostication and to identify the complications, the present complication as well as oncoming complication. And with all this information, you can plan appropriate management. So the classification can be according to the number, based on the number, so based on the stages. When we were students and in our early practice, we were eagerly waiting for the guidelines to come because we know better, we can know better, and we can practice better. But today we are afraid of guidelines. Any guideline which comes in says different numbers. So the guidelines are confused. What is hypertension itself? So each guideline is giving a different number for the diagnosis and also the severity of hypertension. And 2017, the ACC-AHA said the stage 1 hypertension is above 130. Immediately next year, ESC said it is 140 is the stage 1 hypertension. So they called the stage 1 as high normal blood pressure. So according to the ACC, stage 2 is equal to or more than 140/90. Whereas in ESC, stage 2 is 160 to 179 systolic and 100 to 109 diastolic. There is no grade 3 in ACC. It is only hypertensive crisis when systolic equal or more than 180 with the diastolic equal or more than 120. Whereas there is grade 3 hypertension in ESC, it is equal to 180 or more than 110 diastolic. Our own Indian guidelines of hypertension is there, just came in June 2019, which said it almost followed the European Society guidelines in classification as high normal stage 1 and 2, and it classified the isolated systolic hypertension as the systolic pressure more than 140 to 159 as grade 1 systolic hypertension when the diastolic is less than 90, and grade 2 systolic isolated systolic hypertension is more than 160 with a diastolic of less than 90. And 2020, we had the recent classification, International Society of Hypertension classification, which gave us different numbers and different stages. So normal BP here is less than 130/85, and high normal BP is 130 to 139, and diastolic is 85 to 89. And grade 1 here is 140 to 159, and the diastolic is 90 to 99. And grade 2 is equal to 160 systolic or more than 160 systolic, or diastolic of equal or more than 100. So this combined actually the ACC as well as ESC guidelines and came out with a number. And of course, the isolated systolic hypertension is systolic is more than 140 and diastolic is less than 90. Hypertensive crisis is equal to or more than 180 systolic and 120 diastolic. Of course, for the entire course, we have to follow one of the numbers, and we cannot confuse what is stage 1 and stage 2 throughout our course. So I thought this will be a combination and a logical classification of hypertension as per International Society of Hypertension. I think it is better we stick on to these numbers to define what is high normal, what is grade 1, and it is also grade 2, very simple, and so that we can remember the numbers easily and stage accordingly. So this is what I thought we'll use as our numbers and stages based on the number classification for this webinar. Then based on whether it is systolic hypertension, systolic and diastolic hypertension, or isolated diastolic hypertension. So isolated systolic hypertension we have already defined as systolic more than 140 in the presence of diastolic pressure less than 90. Long back, WHO graded this into 3 groups. Now we have the Indian guidelines have graded into 2 groups. It can be anything above 140 up to 180 is grade 3. And according to Indian guidelines, it is 140 and 160 as grade 1 and grade 2. So it is the way you look at the basic pathophysiology of isolated systolic hypertension. It is primarily due to increase in cardiac output in the young, and it is because of augmented aortic stiffness or loss of aortic elasticity in the elderly. Then there is an entity called isolated diastolic hypertension, which is very rare. Most often it is in the young, isolated increase in peripheral resistance. And here it is defined as systolic BP of less than 140 and diastolic pressure of more than 90 according to the JNC 7 criteria. So prior studies suggest the isolated diastolic hypertension is more common in younger individual, associated with the future systolic hypertension, but generally not associated with a greater risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. But one exception to this rule is that first time you detect a isolated diastolic hypertension in the elderly of more than 65 years, then you must suspect a secondary cause of hypertension in that particular individual. Then we come to the classical systolic and diastolic hypertension, which we have graded. All the grades of hypertension, we have said it is systolic and diastolic hypertension. And the next hypertension, the fourth hypertension we have is a hypertension with a high pulse pressure. Here there is increase in systolic pressure and lowered diastolic pressure, which has increase in pulse pressure. This is a most dangerous form of hypertension. Increase in systolic and lowering of diastolic pressure, high pulse pressure, hypertension. So if you look at this very old study, Mr. Fit study, according to the study, you can see that according to the type of hypertension, you have the prognosis. The worst prognosis is going to happen. This is as far as coronary heart disease death, but 10,000 persons. The most dangerous hypertension is increased systolic and lowering diastolic. High pulse pressure hypertension is the most dangerous, followed by combined systolic and diastolic hypertension. You can look at the mortality here. And third is going to be the hypertension. You can see that here systolic and diastolic. Here you can see that isolated systolic hypertension. And fourth is in that order of the prognosis or the risk is isolated diastolic hypertension. So this is important to know how the hypertension is systolic, isolated systolic, isolated diastolic, systolic and diastolic, and isolated diastolic. So this is what I told you. The understanding this classification has immediately told us which hypertension is going to be the most dangerous, which hypertension is going to be the least dangerous. So if you look at the age and the prevalence of different types of hypertension, as you go from younger people to the older people, in younger people, the isolated diastolic hypertension is a little bit more, followed by isolated systolic hypertension is a little less, and most often you have systolic and diastolic hypertension. As the age advances, during middle age, you can see there is a significant middle age, you can see the significant increase in systolic and diastolic hypertension as well as the systolic hypertension. And in the elderly, there is a significant decrease in isolated diastolic hypertension, very huge increase in isolated systolic hypertension, and little bit decrease in systolic and diastolic hypertension. The big message, as Dr. Muruganathan put here, is in any age group, and in any type of hypertension, the people who have controlled hypertension is very less. So this is the whole idea about this webinar. Then we come to whether it's a primary hypertension or a secondary hypertension. Primary hypertension is most often controllable, not curable. Lifelong assessment and control. It is usually diagnosed in middle age. It presents as systolic and diastolic hypertension more commonly, or maybe in young people, it may be an isolated diastolic hypertension. In elderly, systolic hypertension is more prevalent and more difficult to treat. As we have already seen, the most dangerous blood pressure is high systolic pressure and a low diastolic pressure. Whereas secondary hypertension is most often curable, most often. So the common causes I want to remember, as because Dr. Rajasekhar is here, I cannot say any mnemonic. But anyway, to my part, I have developed a mnemonic to remember the common secondary causes of hypertension as CROPT. C for chronic kidney disease, R for renovascular disease, O for obstructive sleep apnea, P for primary hyperaldosteronism, E for ethanol, and D for drugs. So the CROPT, if you remember the CROPT, most often 85 to 90% of secondary hypertensions will come in this group. The uncommon causes are likely to be pheochromocytoma, Cushing's, all endocrine causes of thyroid, hypo and hyper, coactation, primary parathyroidism, adrenal hyperplasia, and syndromes other than medullary-cortical syndromes other than hyperaldosteronism and acromegaly, or there are causes. So most of the first step in the treatment or the approach to hypertension is to say whether I have a curable form of hypertension or I have only controllable form of hypertension. And third, depending upon the place, whether the hypertension is in the clinic, in the house, or in the working place. So one thing which has not changed over last 100 years is our sphygmomanometer and the clinic blood pressure recording. So this is what we have been doing for years together, although our life has changed from this type of the family meetings to this type of isolated people who are looking at their monitors for WhatsApp and Facebook. But this mission has not changed for the last 100 years, and we continue to rely upon the measurement of clinic blood pressure for our adjustment, treatment of hypertension, as well as the preventing future complication of hypertension. It is very practical, and it is very important to know that many of the clinical trials done, which have shown that the antihypertensives can reduce future mortality and morbidity, are done with clinic blood pressure recordings. And of course, there is one more newer clinic BP recording has come in, especially in the trial of SPRINT. There, they kept the patient in a particular room and connected an automatic device. And after this device is connected, the device, everybody went out of that room, and device waited for 5 minutes, then recorded 3 blood pressures at 1 minute interval that were averaged to provide the reported value. So the purpose of this is to rule out what is going to be, I am going to tell you subsequently, the white coat hypertension. BP by this unobserved method are 7 to 10 millimeters mercury lower than the conventional blood pressure. So the target itself is different for the automated clinical BP recording, which is used in SPRINT. So of course, today's hypertension management is not complete without knowing the knowledge of out of clinic blood pressure recordings. So you have to have what is happening to the patient in the house or in the working place or throughout 24 hours subsequently, so that you will have better idea, and also you can adjust the drug accordingly what is happening outside your clinic. Most often I used to think the hypertension treatment we have been doing for so many decades is highly unscientific, because the patient comes in once in 3 months. Most often we don't check blood pressure, some paramedics check blood pressure, and they come with a number. With that number, we adjust the drug for the next 3 months. So that is what the hypertension practice is going on for so many decades, what we are doing. So no longer it can be done, because we know there is a lot of things which are happening and the blood pressure is highly fluctuant. And the most important cause day to day, the blood pressure is so varying. The most important cause of very much increased blood pressure in our day-to-day practice or day-to-day life is giving a lecture. So when I am giving a lecture, my pressure is more than 20 millimeters of mercury high when compared to I am resting. So that amount of variation may be happening day to day, and we ignore that when we rely upon only clinical blood pressure reading. So that's why we know that for quite some time we have white coat hypertension, where the clinical blood pressure is high, home blood pressure is normal. It constitutes around 20 to 30% of clinical hypertension. So if you patient has got only high blood pressure in the clinic, there is unnecessary drug therapy, especially in the elderly. It can produce postural hypotension and syncope at home. And one important fact is these people may ultimately develop future hypertension. So you can argue that instead of wearing a white coat, I can wear a different dress, and whether I can treat white coat hypertension, but still the patient is afraid of you. Of course, today in our country, we have a reverse white coat hypertension. Whenever we see the patient, our blood pressure increases because we do not know which patient is going to hit us, which patient is going to burn our nursing home. So it is a reverse white coat hypertension today. So that's why we have to be also be guarded by patient-related white coat hypertension. The other hypertension which came into focus a few years back is called masked hypertension, where the patient's blood pressure at clinic is normal, whereas home or working place blood pressure is high. I especially mentioned as working place because this is a typical hypertension of many of the IT professionals. People work around the clock with a lot of tension, with time gold activities, and also irregular food, fast food, drug abuse, substance abuse. And these are the people who enter into their office, undergo enormous stress, and develop high blood pressure. When they come to your clinic and see you, they are so relaxed and their blood pressure is normal. Whereas when they go to the office and see so much of stress in the office, their blood pressure is very high, and when they come to you, the blood pressure is normal. And especially when the patient enters the home and sees the major risk factor in the home, the blood pressure increases. So either the home blood pressure is increasing or the blood pressure increasing in the working place is called masked hypertension. And most often the masked hypertension is not diagnosed if you rely upon only the clinical blood pressure reading. It constitutes about 10% of general population, and it is there about 30% of treated hypertensive patients. You think your clinic blood pressure is normal, you are nicely control the blood pressure, but his blood pressure would have been high in working place or in the house. It is higher in diabetes and chronic kidney disease. 1 out of 3 treated hypertensive patients has got masked hypertension. Prognosis of masked hypertension is not like white coat hypertension. It is going to be the same, if not worse, as sustained hypertension. More dangerous is it is not diagnosed. The only clue to diagnose a masked hypertension is that when you have unexplained target organ disease in the presence of normal blood pressure in your clinic, you must suspect masked hypertension. In previous years, when you have unexplained left ventricular hypertrophy, we used to diagnose hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. But today, if you have unexplained left ventricular hypertrophy, first thing you have to rule out is masked hypertension. So the presence of target organ disease in the presence of a normal clinical BP is a situation where you have to suspect masked hypertension. So that's why we have the recent classification of this hypertension, where if the pressure is normal in clinic and normal in home, it is normotension. So both are normal. Whereas first time you diagnose high BP in clinic, normal blood pressure in the house, it is called white coat hypertension. In a treated patient, if you have high BP in clinic and low BP at home or normal BP at home, it is called white coat effect. Similarly, if you have normal BP in clinic and high BP in home, in the first visit, it is masked hypertension. Whereas in treated hypertensive patients, your home blood pressure is continued to be high, it is called masked effect in hypertension. Of course, sustained hypertension is there is no home, clinic, and BP difference. So depending upon, then we come to the day of the hypertension. As I told you, the hypertension varies in a significant way throughout the day. So one thing to do is to have an ambulatory blood pressure monitoring to monitor the blood pressure throughout the 24 hours with a periodic blood pressure recording, which can be arranged or which can be programmed over 24-hour period while patients are undergoing daily activities, including sleep. And we have different numbers for out of clinic blood pressure recording. So what is happening is the 140/90 of your clinic blood pressure is equivalent to 135/80 of home blood pressure. That means anything more than 135/85 in your home blood pressure monitoring is likely to be hypertension. So when you look at the ambulatory BP monitoring, daytime ambulatory monitoring is like home BP monitoring, 135/85. Average 24 hours ambulatory monitoring is 130/80, and your nighttime blood pressure is 120/80. And as I already mentioned, in clinic, automated BP has got a different reading of 135/85. So there are different numbers for depending upon where the blood pressure is recorded. So this classification is based on where the blood pressure is recorded and what time of the day the blood pressure is recorded. So as I told you, the 24 hours BP monitoring is, you can see how much the systolic and diastolic is varying. What is concerned, especially in 24 hours BP monitoring, the classification is depending upon this time of the day, which is the night. So you expect the blood pressure to fall almost 10% from the daytime value around 2 a.m. or 2 to 4 a.m. in the morning, which is called dipping because of increase in parasympathetic activity and decrease in sympathetic activity. So depending upon whether this dipping is present or not, once again, 24 hours BP monitoring classification can be a dipper or a non-dipper, extreme dipper or a reverse dipper. So this is the average 10%. So according to this ambulatory BP monitoring, we have different types of hypertension. So normally blood pressure decreases by 10 to 20% at night, which is called the dipping. If the patient does not have dipping and actually increases his or her pressure in the night, it is called reverse dipping or nighttime hypertension. So the difference between daytime blood pressure and nighttime blood pressure is less than 10%. It is called non-dipping. The dipping is between 10 to 20%, and which is a normal pattern. And if the patient excessively lowers his pressure in the night more than 20%, it is called extreme dipping. So that both except dipping, all the other types of dipping is going to increase your cardiovascular complications. So that non-dipping or reverse dipping is going to increase organ damage and also increase CV events. Now we also understand this extreme dipping and is the one which actually not only produce a stroke in the night because of the excessive lowering of BP, and it is the reason for producing the daytime early morning surge in hypertension. Because when the patient gets up from the lying position, this postural hypertension will happen. And that is the cause of the early morning overshoot of blood pressure. This is what I told you, how unscientific our treatment of hypertension for so many years. The least blood pressure which predicts future event is clinic blood pressure. Which predicts the most the future clinical events is the nighttime blood pressure. And we have been treating hypertension for many years without looking at the most important blood pressure, which is the nighttime blood pressure. So there are three varieties of blood pressure recording. So these are three places we record blood pressure: in the clinic, in the house, and throughout the day of patients. All the three types of recordings have got their own advantage and disadvantage. And what we must know about this is the home blood pressure monitoring and also the 24 hours monitoring have got strong association with the cardiovascular outcomes. That's why, in addition to clinic blood pressure knowledge, we must always have in each patient what is happening in his working place or in the house. And at least once in a while, we must know what is happening to his pressure in the night. So that's what I'm trying to say. And then depending upon the position, whether the patient is supine or standing, So these are the normal blood pressure changes on standing. The systolic blood pressure comes to the tune of -6.5. Diastolic pressure may slightly rise and the heart rate may increase by 10 beats per minute. And orthostatic hypotension is described as systolic pressure of at least 20 millimeter drop and diastolic of 10 millimeter drop. This is the most dangerous, difficult hypertension, which is called supine hypertension, orthostatic hypotension syndrome. So these patients are supposed to have almost 160 or 170 blood pressure when they lie down, and when they get up, the blood pressure is likely to be 100 or 110. So this is the most difficult hypertension to treat. This is called supine hypertension, orthostatic hypotension syndrome. And this is most often has got multiple etiologies. One of the common etiology here is autonomic nervous system disturbance. And this is the one which is difficult to treat. And it has got a variable course and diverse outcomes. And it is a very difficult blood pressure to treat. Of course, we have a condition called orthostatic hypertension. Orthostatic hypertension is defined as whenever the patient has got active standing. That means after lying down for 5 minutes, the patient stands for 3 minutes, his blood pressure increases, especially systolic blood pressure, more than equal or more than 20 millimeters of mercury when assuming upright posture, or when you are using the head up tilting procedure, the blood pressure increases on standing. So once again, orthostatic hypertension is due to increased sympathetic response. It is increased, exaggerated the response of the corrective response of sympathetic system to correct the drop in blood pressure on standing. And once again, the orthostatic hypertension is, once again, you have to rule out autonomic causes and causes leading on to sympathetic activity, especially secondary causes like the pheochromocytoma and so on. So now we have classified according to the position, then we classified according to the future complications. So we can divide the hypertension as uncomplicated hypertension and complicated hypertension. Uncomplicated hypertension is the one which has got purely increase in number without associated hypertension mediated organ disease, without increase in the additional risk factors or no comorbid conditions. If these things are absent, then it is an uncomplicated hypertension. Here your goal is to get the number alone. Whereas when the patient has got a complicated hypertension, he has got additional 3 things. One is he's got additional risk factor. Second, he's got additional hypertension mediated organ damage, and he has got a comorbid condition. So this will greatly influence the drugs you are going to use in that particular patient, depending upon these 3 variables. Of course, we all know about the conventional risk factors. Why the associated risk factor is very important in a patient with hypertension? Because we have a mindset that when the patient comes with BP, we treat the BP alone. When the patient comes with diabetes, we treat diabetes alone. We be happy about it. When the sugar is normal, we are happy about it. When the blood pressure is normal, we are happy about it. So look at this famous Interheart study, which looked at the first myocardial infarction worldwide. And if you have hypertension only, your odds ratio to develop a first myocardial infarction is hardly 3. First odds ratio is 3. Whereas for the same number, let us say this patient has got 150, 100. For the same number, if the patient is going to have lipid abnormality, diabetes, and smoking, in addition to hypertension, when all the 4 are present, the odds ratio to develop future myocardial infarction for the same number is 64. From 3 to 64 for the same number, which is influenced by the additional risk factors. So that's why the treatment of hypertension is not treatment of numbers alone. You have to look at all the other risk factors the patient has, and holistically, you control all the risk factors, then only you have the good cardiovascular outcome. Then we look at 5 important hypertension mediated organ disease in the brain, in the form of CVA, infarct, hemorrhage, or TIA, various grades of hypertensive retinopathy, coronary heart disease, hypertrophy, heart failure, arrhythmias in the heart, albuminuria, nephropathy, reduced GFR, and chronic kidney disease in the kidney, peripheral vascular disease, aortic aneurysm, dissecting aneurysm, on the vascular side. So if the patient has got any of this organ damage in addition to any stage of hypertension, what's saying is prognosis is bad. So this is the beautiful study from European Society guidelines for many years now. So it said, for example, this is high normal blood pressure as far as our definition is concerned, stage 1 hypertension as far as ACC is concerned. If this patient does not have any risk factor, his chance of developing future myocardial infarction or stroke is in the next 10 years is less than 15%. For the same pressure, if the patient has got hypertension mediated organ disease in the form of LVH, associated comorbid as CKD, or associated risk factors diabetes, for the same number, his chance of developing future myocardial infarction is 30%. So that's why the risk doubles depending upon your associated risk factor, target organ damage, or comorbids. So simply to remember the comorbid conditions you may have come across, which makes the hypertension complicated, is the most important one is sleep apnea. B for asthma, bronchial asthma, C for CKD, D for depression, E for extra drugs, and F for frail, and G for goiter. So always look for 3 things. What is associated risk factor the patient has got, whether the patient has got a hypertension mediated organ damage, and third, what is the comorbid conditions, and also what other drugs the patient may be taking. Because many times the drugs taken for the comorbid conditions may be producing the high blood pressure. And second thing is your drugs may be exacerbating your comorbid conditions. That's why it is very important to have the knowledge of comorbid conditions. Then presentation, especially acute presentation of hypertension. Whenever the patient has got blood pressure of more than 180 systolic equal to or more than 180 systolic equal to or more than 120 diastolic is supposed to be in hypertensive crisis, which can be divided into hypertensive urgency or hypertensive emergency. Hypertensive urgency is a patient walking into your office or clinic without any acute clinical organ damage or acute clinical organ presentation. So he has got mild headache, he's got mild giddiness. But if you take the blood pressure is 220 or 120 or so on. So this patient is supposed to be in hypertensive urgency. That means he's got the number, but not the acute clinical problem. Whereas the same number, the patient presents acute pulmonary edema, acute CVA, acute kidney injury, or dissection, or an eclampsia or a preeclampsia, this patient is in hypertensive emergency. So this patient should be immediately admitted in intensive care unit, and what we have to treat this patient will be intravenous antihypertensives. Whereas here, you can treat them with oral antihypertensives. Here, you must bring down the pressure over 24 hours. Here, depending upon the condition, you may have to bring down the pressure within minutes or hours. And of course, previous terms we used to say as malignant hypertension and accelerated hypertension. Malignant hypertension is the one which has got extensive hypertensive retinopathy, including papilledema, renal involvement in the form of nephrosclerosis, which is malignant, and usually it is with a diastolic pressure of more than 130. Whereas accelerated hypertension is once again hypertension with up to grade 3 retinopathy and not papilledema. So it may have little better prognosis than a malignant hypertension. So this is the classification of hypertension emergencies, or what I used to call as acute severe hypertension, which can be urgency, emergency, malignant hypertension, accelerated hypertension. Because this classification will tell us with what speed we have to reduce the blood pressure, with what drugs we have to reduce the blood pressure, and what is the time frame you are supposed to achieve the normal blood pressure. So for this classification is important. Then I come to 2 important things, which is not actually in your the theory. This is a pure practical classification of knowing the educated patient hypertensive, uneducated patient hypertensive, a rural hypertensive, urban hypertensive, a rich hypertensive, middle class hypertensive, or poor hypertensive. This all matters. This classification, this important thing matters. We have an Indian paradox. Many of the Western worlds will have the blood pressure prevalence is lower in educated people and high income group. Whereas in India, as the education increases, the prevalence increases and your risk factors increases. And as your income increases, your blood pressure increases, prevalence of blood pressure increases. This is the Indian paradox. The more educated we are, the more richer we are likely to develop hypertension because of abnormal lifestyle. So that is why it is no longer true like a Western population. It is only the uneducated people, poor people who do not have any knowledge about the disease develop hypertension. Even those people who have a good knowledge of disease, they ultimately develop hypertension because they don't change their lives in spite of their better education, in spite of their better economic situation. That's why it is very important to realize when you treat hypertension, whether he is urban rich or rural poor, because screening, diagnosis may different approaches. In urban rich patient, the patient may come to you for the diagnosis and treatment. For rural poor, you have to go to him for the diagnosis and treatment. Yeah, costly pill prescribed to rich patient, prescribed to poor patient, or a cheap pill prescribed to a rich patient may not be complied. So the investigation also, you may have to be very prudent in your approach to extensively navigating a patient who's got a rural poor. And the management also with the lifestyle modification also is different. The drugs also may vary. The compliance and control are different, or both are difficult in India. It is not only, so most often we believe that the rural people, we have a difficulty in control. So Dr. Muruganathan said our control of hypertension is very, very pathetic in India. So it is not confined at rural uneducated population. It is also for educated urban population. So the classification confusion likely to be the classification of hypertension is not according to number alone, not the type of hypertension alone, like systolic, diastolic, and so on, not the etiology alone, like a primary or secondary, not the place alone, clinic, home, working place, or so, or 24 hours, and not the time alone. It is not only a morning pressure or a nighttime pressure. It is not only the future risk depending upon complicated or uncomplicated hypertension. It is not only the body position, supine hypertension, or an orthostatic hypertension, and also not the presentation acute hypertension, emergency, urgency, malignant, accelerated, not only the location education, and also the socioeconomic status alone, but the classification of hypertension should include all of these parameters to understand the patient better, to understand the disease better, and to plan a particular drug better. I'm not sure with all these numbers and so on, you're like this now. So anyway, I thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Chennappan, for that very, very clear message about classification of classification. I think we have got some questions in the chat box. Before that, my dear brothers, this is the first time we are trying one of the apps called Kahoot. The Kahoot app is very good for question and answer. We have not purchased that Kahoot. So today we have a free trial for 50 people. We are going to ask you to get into the play. Whoever has got extra mobile with you, please go to Google and type kahoot.it. Kahoot, K-A-H-O-O-T. Kahoot IT. Even in the laptop, you can open a separate table. Go to the www.kahoot.it, and that is the app where you can play and then you can answer question answer. So this is the first time we are doing a trial. If it works out well, we are going to purchase this app from the next time onwards. So here only about 50 people will be allowed, but doesn't matter. It will be interesting. All the viewers can see the fun. So first go to kahoot.it. Are you ready? Now I'll share the slides. Kahoot.it. You can use your same laptop and go to open a different table and then type Kahoot, Kahoot.it. Or if you have an extra mobile, you can do that Kahoot.it and then the picture will come like this. And once you are ready, we can start the quiz program. And you know, this is the pin for the game, 5806649. Those of you who have opened that Kahoot, it will ask the game pin. The game pin is 5806649. Is it clear? So I think some of you have already opened Kahoot. Can you all see that? And this is the pin number, 5806649. You enter the pin and then now I got 4 players. Yeah, now 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players we have, 12, 15 players, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 26, 28, and this will take only, this question answer session will take only 4 minutes once you complete. And after that, we have got questions from the chat box. Friends, I have good news for you. All those people who are going to attend all the 10 webinars, our Tamil Nadu Medical Council is going to give 7 credit points. 7 credit points for all those people who attend. I have the record who has logged in at what time. So I'm going to give these names to the Medical Council to get the 7 credit points. I also told you who is attending very sincerely and actively and taking part in all these activities, we can give 1 home blood pressure monitoring. But today we got only 250 people who attended from 850 to 920. Now the rate, the number is about 570. But fortunately, only 250 were, the first 20 minutes. So we will consider all those points. Who logs in early and who continues to be here, all that. I think we'll stop because 56 players are there. I'll stop and I'll go for the game. Are you ready? Yes. 61. Now 62 players are there. 64. 66. I think we'll stop now and I will go for the play. Okay? Yeah. Yes. Go. Now the interactive session starts now. 3, 2, 1. Now quiz program starts. Come. What is the percentage of patients who have controlled BP in India? Okay. Yeah. Now, second, the scoreboard. Yeah. Now, the patient has a BP of 140/90. According to ESC guidelines, he is in high normal BP, stage 2, stage 1, stage 3. Your time starts now. Whoever answers first will get more marks. The person who gets in first will get more marks. The same right answer, 2 different people will get 2 different marks. Yes. What is hypertensive crisis? Your time starts now. Only 20 seconds. Yes. Question number 4. Which is the most dangerous hypertension? Isolated systolic, systolic and diastolic, isolated diastolic, or high systolic and low diastolic? Hypertension mediated organ damage includes all except heart, nerves, brain, and vessels. Very good. 52 people have answered 53. Let's see. Okay, the right answer you can see except nerves. Yes, next. And which is more dangerous? Moderate elevation of multiple risk factors or severe elevation of a single risk factor? Wait. Very nice. 25, 32 have answered. 33, 37. One more second. 39, 40 answers. Good. The answer is moderate elevation of multiple risk factors. Then patient has LVH. His BP in clinic is 130/80. What is most likely? Hypertensive cardiopathy, mass hypertension, amyloidosis, or white coat hypertension? Oh, so fast. 40 answers. 7 seconds more. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. 48 answers have come. Yes, you are right. Mass hypertension. Yes. The next one. Patient's first high BP is 170/110. You must rule out white coat syndrome. Yes or no? Very easy. Yes or no? Wait. No is the right answer. Yes. 2 more questions. Which BP gives the least prognostic information? Nighttime BP, early morning BP, clinic BP, or even? Forty-seven answers have come. The right answer is clinic BP. And the last question, extreme dippers are prone for stroke, early morning surge, syncope, all of the above. All of the above is the right answer. So, my dear brothers, we can see first, second, third. Yeah, we'll show you. All of you have known the answers now because it was there on the screen. Now we give the result. Om 4565 5252. Atul Bali 5959. That is the first. Do you? Okay, the first prize, is winner is due. Atul Bali, our guest from USA, scored second, and then Om 4,565, 6 out of 10. That same 6 out of 10 Atul Bali, but he was very quick. That is why he got more than 5,000. Whereas Om got only 4,000 because he was lagging behind. and Dew has scored only 7 out of 10. Very good, impressive. Chenniappan's talk was very good. So many people have understood, and so many people have scored very good marks. Okay, now I'll stop sharing. I'll go to the podium. Okay, I think we'll go. Okay, we'll go back to the podium. Okay, I hope all of you enjoyed this quiz program. Correct. Now we'll go to the questions now from the panelists. Chenniappan, did you like the question answer? Chenniappan? Rajshekhar, did you like the question answer, Rajshekhar? You unmute, please.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Now I'll go to the questions. Dr. Magesh from Mysore. High uric acid not given the importance it deserves in the first set of investigations in hypertensive patient. Would you like to answer, Rajshekhar, first? Rajshekhar, why uric acid is not given importance it deserves in the first set of investigation for hypertension? Unmute. Unmute, Rajshekhar.
Well, I have unmuted, but automatically it gets muted.
Okay.
So high serum uric acid is very much present in systemic hypertension above 7 mg/%. So it is mandatory to check serum uric acid in every case of systemic hypertension.
Okay.
One request.
Yes.
See, this is the first topic. I think the interactive questions should be limited to the topic we have done, because the topic, the questions which are coming are going to be answering in our subsequent lectures and so on. So whatever the topic we have done today, if there are questions, and that will be ideal, because this is going to be investigation, treatment, and all. We are going to have it in each one of the modules. So this is my request, sir. Limit the question to the topic we have discussed.
Okay. I think this question for Atul: why the prevalence of hypertension is so high globally? Atul, are you there?
Yes, sir. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Chenniappan for such a wonderful presentation. I thought. I feel very privileged to sit on the panel here. I feel like I'm sitting and learning so much as I'm listening. But I think he pointed out an excellent slide where he showed some of the social determinants, which were also considered factors in the prevalence of hypertension. One major aspect which has changed over the years is actually the access to medical care. So globally, I think we have much better access to medical care than what we did, and that is including the developed country. We have begun to appreciate the role of hypertension in end organ damage a lot more over the last, I'd say, 30 to 40 years. Some of the best clinical trials in hypertension have also developed in these times, and therefore we have begun to appreciate that what we previously thought was a relatively benign condition, which was, quote unquote, merely a number, that is not so, as Dr. Chenniappan has very, beautifully elaborated. The other aspects that, without trying to get too philosophical in the whole aspect, would be improved agricultural practices. I think improved access to food basically has resulted in less extreme nutritional disorders because of malnourishment, and now we have increasing prevalence of obesity over the world. In fact, if you look at the WHO statistics on this topic, the worldwide obesity rates have virtually tripled since 1975. That is an incredible number. And unfortunately, in India, as we have begun to uplift the health and socioeconomic status of the various classes of our country, it has also come with some of the hazards of nutritional excess and obesity. And I think lastly, we are also depending in today's day and age a lot more on processed foods. We are not eating the way our ancestors would eat. So we are getting a lot more intake of salt than we ever did before. And perhaps we are depending less on fresh fruits and vegetables as we once used to, which also reduces dietary potassium intake, both of which are very important factors of hypertension. So I think that is probably my hypothesis.
Thank you. Waqar, would you like to add any other point apart from what Atul said?
I think he made the main points. It is the urbanization and less exercise. We are doing almost everything virtually. Even meetings now we are attending from home. At least we used to fly to go to an airport and walk in an airport and then walk in a Congress center. The cardiologists will know the world's largest cardiology meeting just started, the European Society of Cardiology, and we're going to attend from home. But that's just the point. We have much. We are not exercising. It is urbanization. And Atul pointed out all the dietary factors, eating more processed food and a high salt intake. So those are the main points.
Thank you, Waqar. Now, Dr. Pancholia, Dr. Magesh from Mysore. Should not pulse pressure mean BP be routinely calculated and noted down and given more importance than just systolic and diastolic in routine day-to-day practice? Pancholia.
Yes, pulse pressure is also very important contributor and important risk factors, as what Dr. Chennappan already pointed out. The more dangerous is the high systolic and the low diastolic pressure. The pulse pressure is wide, so there are increased chances of getting target organ damage or the complications. So that is also a very important issue, and that is to be practiced.
Okay. Hyderabad, Somnath, is there any age criteria in classification of hypertension? If not, why age was not taken into consideration? Chenny, would you like to answer?
Yeah, it all depends upon what you consider elderly. No, it keeps on changing. Previously, when we were students, people who are aged about 50, we think they are old people. So now it has become middle age. So it's a constant variable of what is defined as elderly. So most often the elderly is most often above 65 years. I hope that should be a good definition. And elderly must be more often above the age of 65 years. That's what primarily defined as the elderly. Whereas in the other group, we are always changing what is young age, what is middle age, and so on. So this is a constant changing factor. So what is very important is about the elderly hypertension who are above 65 years. Whereas below that, especially when patient is very young, below 40 years or below 30 years, then you have to look for secondary causes. And also the extreme age of more than 65, you have to look for first-time hypertension in these people. You have to look for secondary cause. So that is the importance of age. And also the pathophysiological changes are little different, which I think I'll talk tomorrow about how the age plays a part in pathology of hypertension or etiopathogenesis of hypertension. So the different causes are happening in the young, different causes are happening in the elderly as the cause of hypertension.
Thank you, Chennappan. Rajshekhar,
Yes, sir.
what are the criteria for diagnosing labile hypertension?
What's that?
Labile hypertension. What are the criteria for diagnosing labile?
Labile hypertension changing from one time to other time. So we have to monitor. Suppose that as Dr. Chennappan has that is masked hypertension and reverse weight coat hypertension, otherwise known as called. So we have to monitor periodically, and changes in BP, that is very, very important. So that is labile hypertension, changing BP.
1 minute, sir. Just tell you that the labile hypertension is a little bit of old terminology. Now we have called BP variability.
BP variability, yes.
BP variability is the better term that we can look at patients who are changing. There is a short-term variability or a middle-term variability or a long-term variability. So a lot of BP variability there. Transient increase in blood pressure is the next step. Transient increase in blood pressure is the one, whichever the patient, suddenly you hear, now my city has got the maximum COVID deaths today, your BP suddenly increases and comes back. So that is a transient increase in hypertension. So what we called as a labile hypertension previously is now considered as a BP variability, and different types of BP variability are there according to the intra-day variability or intra-month variability and so on. So that's what the term now is, BP variability.
Okay, thank you.
1 minute.
Yeah.
As Dr. Chennappan has told, it is almost concurrent with the glycemic variability, with the blood glucose changing from time to time. So as he said, it is an old terminology. Yes, I do agree. So it's almost like glycemic variability.
Okay, thank you, Rajshekhar. From Lanson from Mangalore. Some of my MBBS teaching faculty were firmly against usage of automated sphygmomanometer. Sir, how reliable would you rate this? Any one of the panelists, international panelists, Atul or Vakar, would you like to take this question?
I can take this question. I think the ACC AHA 2017 guidelines talks a lot about the measurement technique and how measurement technique itself has to be something that we must practice. And I suspect that Dr. Kolako, I seem to remember that name from the poster presentation, so I know that he has done well there. So Dr. Kolako, being a younger colleague of ours, I think the MBBS teaching faculty likes to inculcate good practices. You must learn how to accurately measure a blood pressure using a manual device, because at some point you might find yourself sitting in your own private practice clinic instructing your staff to check blood pressures for you. And if you don't know how to do it properly, then you're likely going to misinform your staff members who are lesser trained than you. I think as far as the accuracy of the device is concerned, no, these automated blood pressure devices are actually of pretty good accuracy. In fact, more and more, we have been doing studies on automated office blood pressure measurements, which basically means that to reduce the impact of the so-called white coat effect of the clinician or the nursing staff member checking the blood pressure directly, we basically leave the patient alone in the room, and the patient is instructed to place their arm in the device. They press the button themselves. And we have found that there are surprisingly significantly lower measurements of systolic and diastolic blood pressure observed in the automated office BP readings. So to sum it up, basically, measurement manually, I think, is a good practice to understand how to do it correctly during MBBS, but automated devices are not inferior as such.
Okay, Atul, I'm very happy. You seem to remember all these students, Now you become very popular also among students. Very good, Atul. That's good. You remember that name also. Good. The next question is, where do we place supine hypertension and upright hypotension in the classification? What are the causes? Anybody, any panelists can take, otherwise I'll ask Chenny to do it.
Yeah, I'll do it. This is a very typical syndrome, supine hypertension and orthostatic hypotension. Its most common cause is autonomic failure, actually. So the failure of the compensatory mechanisms which will come in. It may happen in Parkinsonism plus or any autonomic neuropathy like diabetes mellitus and so on. So the treatment part is most difficult rather than the cause of it. Treatment part is most difficult, because it all depends upon where you are going to have, for example, in the morning, you are going to have orthostatic hypertension, and the night you are lying down, you are going to have hypertension. So what people have done is to give a stocking or some compressive devices in the morning, and give a small dose of antihypertensive in the night, so that both have been taken care of. So in this way, they are trying to treat the orthostatic hypotension when the patient is upright in the mornings and is going to have a supine. And people said that you have to sleep with a little bit of backrest, don't lie down flat. So with a little of backrest, you have to treat, and you have to take the antihypertensive in a small dose of antihypertensive in the night. And most often in the morning, you can wear a stocking or take frequent small food rather than a big food, because big food once again can precipitate a postprandial hypotension. So place your food very frequently, small scoops with the frequent intervals and so on. So that is primarily it is seen in patients with autonomic disturbances, and this is the type of treatment they advocate, and it's very difficult to treat.
Thank you, Dr. Cheniappan. Dr. Wahid Hassan from Kolkata. What is the ideal method to check BP in a patient with atrial fibrillation? Waqar, would you take that question?
Sure, I can take that question. With atrial fibrillation, it depends what they have available. If they have a professional automated equipment, I think I would go with that. If not, then manual blood pressure measurement is fine. My main concern about the non-automated machines is a lot of patients here, at least, can buy in pharmacies small machines to measure blood pressure. They cost almost nothing, $25 to $50, something that in America they sell in CVS, and they have been very inaccurate. So I have my patients bring the machine to the clinic, and then we can calibrate with our own machines. And if they're completely inaccurate, I tell them, please don't use those machines.
Okay. Prakash Govindaswamy from Salem. Which is an ideal sphygmomanometer for clinic measurement? How to validate periodically our sphygmomanometer? Anybody? Pancholia, can you take this question?
Well, now the recommendation is for the this aneroid BP instrument, not the mercury instrument. As a recent guideline by the Indian Hypertension Guideline 4, they have clearly endorsed that this mercury sphygmomanometer not to be used because of the toxicity related to the mercury, and they are endorsing more in favor of this aneroid BP instrument.
How to validate periodically? Pancholia? Okay, I will take this question. You see, periodically validation should be done, especially aneroid means 6 months once and the other one is 1 year once. But many people ask me, where do I go? I tell them, go to Chennai, go to Calcutta, go to something. Then they say, it takes time. So I told them, instead of doing validation again and again, you buy every year 1 BP monitor. See, when somebody can afford to change the automobile car once in 3 years, because one of my friend, I asked him, how often you change the car? He said, once in 3 years, I change the car. I asked him why? Because my car will get, repair again and again. So I want to avoid, so I dispose once in 3 years. When you can buy 6 lakhs rupees of a car once in 3 years, 2,000 rupees of monitor you can buy periodically every year. And I already told you, please buy 3 different cup sizes in your clinic, because many people, they don't have, you can do that. Now, Dr. Panjat Chaudhary, Ghaziabad, does everyone whose office blood pressure is more than 140/90 subject to ambulatory BP monitoring or home BP monitoring would be sufficient? Anybody?
I'll take that. See, that's what I put the question, but I did not answer in my talk. I thought I must have a question which I have not told, so to test your own knowledge. So whenever a patient comes with the 160, 110, that means you have to come, you need not go for the other things like home BP monitoring to confirm white coat hypertension. Any pressure above 160, 110 in your clinic, just 15 minutes gap, you check again. So it is continued to be 160, 110, start treating. So in those people, there is no question of going for home BP monitoring to confirm or exclude white coat hypertension. Whereas they are between the mild 150/90 to 150/100, and you think that the patient is anxious or patient, you can assess the patient. Then of course you can always exclude white coat hypertension. So it all depends upon what number you get on the first visit. So it's very high, it's going to be stage 2. There is no question of confirming it by home BP monitoring or an ambulatory BP monitoring. So the indication to do an ambulatory BP monitoring is at least I feel that, so all the things we have told you, when you suspect white coat, when you suspect MAST, when you suspect that the patient's working place is very stressed. So all this you can do 24 hours whenever you suspect. But the main idea of the ambulatory BP monitoring is the only one which gives you an idea about nighttime blood pressure. So my advice is at least once in a year in your own hypertension patients, it is better to do a ambulatory BP monitoring at least once in a year routinely to know about what's happening in the night and so on. Of course, in resistant hypertension, you must do an ambulatory BP monitoring. When you are pseudo resistance or a true resistance, you must do an ambulatory BP monitoring to know about the pattern of hypertension or the events which are dissipating hypertension and so on. So that's it, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Anita Nambiar from Cochin. How to know dipping, non-dipping, reverse dipping without ambulatory blood pressure monitoring? Pancholia? Is there any way without ambulatory blood pressure?
Without ambulatory, Yes, so this night dipping and or reverse dipping and all that can be detected only by the ABPM. We cannot do it by the home blood pressure monitoring. So
Okay.
ABPM is must in these situations for detection.
Okay. No, in fact, there is a new home blood pressure monitoring has come, which can take the blood pressure in the night also. They're trying to develop that home blood pressure monitoring, which is easy, but it's not yet come to the market. Okay, Dr. Nigal Sarif from Salem. Is there a difference when measuring blood pressure among different types of devices like aneroid, mercury, and digital ones? Is there so-called gold standard device? Bakar, would you like to take this question? You unmute, yeah.
Yeah, no, right now, the Android devices and the electronic devices are both pretty much equal. In fact, my clinic, we don't have any more of the older devices. So we have only the automated electronic devices. But you're right, you could be working somewhere where electronic devices are not available and you need to use the Android devices. So I would use whatever the device that's available to you in your setting and depending where you are.
Okay.
Only the practice pattern, the difference is about the diastolic pressure. So when you do it manually in your stethoscope with ultrasounds, your diastolic pressure is likely to be a little higher than the oscillatory method BP monitorings. They always show a little bit of low diastolic pressure because of the sensitivity of the detecting disappearance of Koroko sounds is much more better electronically than your ears. So that's why in a clinic, so this is the mild difference I always find when the patient comes with a home BP monitoring and we measure. They always say the diastolic is 70 or so on, but when you measure the diastolic, it will be 80 like that. So that's what I found practically between these two methods. These two methods are completely different. They are oscillometric methods, and what you hear is your own Koroko sounds by your ears.
Okay, thank you, Chinipan. Dr. Rajashekar Parthasarthi from Trichy. What is the significance of tracking the blood pressure from childhood, school records for screening and early diagnosis of hypertension?
Certainly, we have to track from the schoolhood and the adulthood. We have also released a very good article just today and 2 days back about the blood pressure, that is the low birth weight, and then continue to measure the blood pressure from the pediatric age group also. It remains a validated point.
Okay, thank you. Dr. M. Shankar Sharma from Bhagalpur. Recommendation for central aortic BP record. I think Vakar or Ratul can take this question. How often you use central aortic blood pressure?
I'm assuming central aortic pressure meaning invasive pressure. And that would be very rare in a routine setting, almost never. We would only get that blood pressure if the patient is undergoing a procedure for any invasive procedure. But to actually use central aortic pressure for measurement for blood pressure just for the sake of blood pressure is almost never.
Okay. In fact, now we have got central aortic pressure devices where you need not do invasive. That's why they think whether we have to do routinely the central aortic pressure. Now the next question is, which instrument is more accurate? We already said. Subclinical. Srinivasa Murthy, how to suspect secondary hypertension? I think we can take that tomorrow, or Sini?
Yes, I think we'll take it tomorrow.
Okay. There are multiple smartwatch gadgets claiming to record BP on a real-time basis. Should those be neglected or can be considered? Kindly enlighten us. Govindraj from Trichy. I think one of you, Atul Bali or Vakar, can take this question. Do you use smartwatches for recording the blood pressure?
I think that's a very interesting question, because the more savvy patients get, the more access we have to technology, the more likely we are to encounter this question in clinical practice. I think the best way to answer that question will be that we don't have sufficient data to suggest that these are accurate. So I have not been recommending to my patients that they utilize, these wearable devices. In fact, if you take a deeper dive into the ACC/AHA 2017 guidelines, what they have recommended is that we stick to arm cuffs. We even avoid wrist cuffs, even if it's a device which is manufactured by a well-known manufacturer. The problem is that the positioning required for an accurate wrist cuff based blood pressure measurement often misleads patients into doing something erroneously, and they can get vastly differing blood pressure measurements as compared to what you would expect had they been using an arm-based cuff. So to sum it up, I recommend patients get a validated blood pressure device with an appropriately sized arm cuff, and avoid wrist cuffs, and completely disregard these wearable devices, because these have not been validated.
Sometimes these wearable devices are the cause of hypertension. One of the cause of secondary hypertension is wearable devices. Because seeing the wrong number, his basic blood pressure may be normal, and seeing that his blood pressure will go up. So I'll add one of the cause of secondary hypertension tomorrow will be the wearable devices.
Yeah, but the good news is, Chenny, even the wearable type of ambulatory blood pressure monitoring is, on pipeline, where it can be used easily. Do you have any idea about that, Waqar? Do you know the the ABBM, which has come in the wrist type model? Do you know about that?
No, I'm not aware of that. The home blood pressure monitoring we use is the ones that are around the arm, and we're not using the wrist ones yet. And I agree that we need to wait for validation of these other devices.
Okay. And you already answered, no, what is the best way to measure blood pressure in atrial fibrillation? That I think
Yes.
we have already answered. The same questions. Padmashri Gulati, ABBM recommended only in patients with normal clinical BP and evidence of end organ damage, or should it be done in majority of patients? I think Chenny, you already answered, but still.
Yeah, I'll answer.
But again, if you go at the guidelines, I mean, the expert panels of all these, American Society of Hypertension, ACC/AHA, even the European Society of Hypertension, everybody recommends that anyone with a new diagnosis of hypertension should be undergoing ABPM monitoring. So is that a practical approach? I don't think so. For all practical purposes, I don't think that is feasible. It is not economically viable. But that is the recommendation. There is growing even the pediatric population that before we assign a diagnosis of hypertension in a pediatric patient, that undergo 24 ABPM.
Yes.
Dr. Pancholia, Disong Patel from Madora, for HBBM, which machine brands are reliable and can be recommended to patients?
Which machine?
Yeah, HBM, which model, which company you recommend for your patients?
In fact, I used in my practice, which is actually provided by Aris company.
Okay.
So which brand I exactly don't know. But
Actually,
I
will answer the question. These instruments available in the website. What are the internationally approved models are available in the international website? There are 3-4 models which you can, that is the standard one, which internationally approved. Rasha, you want to say something, please?
No, sir. As he said, Eris has already projected a video clip in YouTube also, as he has pointed out.
Okay, but no, there is international hypertension website.
Yeah.
You can see all the guidelines.
Yeah.
Okay, now I think I already
do a quick pitch.
Pardon?
I'm actually a member of the American Medical Association validated device listing.
Okay.
There is a website called Validate BP,
Okay.
which keeps track of these devices. Now, not all of them will be available in India, I'm afraid. But I think this is something that we take a very thorough look at. We look at the techniques utilized to validate these devices as submitted by the manufacturers. And needless to say, we have no financial motivation behind it. So we can basically look at the data objectively.
Yeah, I think there are some more questions, but I think we'll wind up. Before I wind up, I request the panelists, Dr. Atul Bali, you already joined our Hypertension Hits WhatsApp group. Thank you for joining the group. Waqar Ahmed, you can also join our WhatsApp group. And Pancholia, you can also join. And under the leadership of Dr. Rajshekhar and myself, we have got 3 hypertension WhatsApp groups. So there are so many questions that have come from our, enthusiastic delegates. So those questions you can answer in the WhatsApp group. So I will make a request to all the 3 to join in one group, so that if there are any questions which has some tough answers, you can chip in and then answer. So all my delegates and brothers, please pardon me, because already time is up. I told everybody only 1.5 hours. Now more than 130 hours is over. So I request all of you to join the program tomorrow, same time, 9 p.m. to 10:30. And I have told you, we are going to give Medical Council accreditation certificate for 7 hours. And those who are attending the 10 webinars and actively participate, come on time, they'll get 1 home blood pressure monitoring. Myself, Dr. Chennappan, Dr. Rajshekhar, and the committee will decide who are those active. Because I saw today at 9:20, only 250 members were there. Now there are about 570. So those 250 who have come between 9 to 9:20 are the real sincere people. So you must come sincerely tomorrow also at 9 o'clock. And the same panel will be there tomorrow also. And as I said, those questions which you have asked will be in the WhatsApp group. You can get the answers clarified by Dr. Pancholia, Dr. Rajshekhar, Atul, and Ahmed. Because Dr. Rajshekhar, every day he gives updates in the WhatsApp groups, and questions also will be answered by the experts. Before I conclude, one drive home message starting from Atul Bali. Just a simple short message. What do you think about hypertension clinic and hypertensionologist?
Well, I am biased because I am a certified hypertension specialist. I think I'm as passionate about this topic as my colleagues here.
Yeah,
very important aspect that we can really change a patient's life with.
Yeah, because I'm more worried since my childhood. I mean, since my physician after I took over, I started hypertension clinic in '82. From that time onwards, I was seeing only diabetologists. They know how to have more centers and excellence, etc. But hypertension specialists are not that much. So that is why we have chosen this topic and this webinar. Vakar, any message for these delegates? One message before we wind up.
I think one message is for them to pay attention, and everybody, all physicians need to know hypertension, how to treat hypertension. That's my main message, because the return on investment is huge over long periods. You started in 1982. My grandfather died at an age that was younger than I was because of a cerebral bleeding and hypertension. So I think everybody needs to know how to treat hypertension.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Rajshekhar, your message, one simple message.
Yes, sir. For all patients, irrespective of their condition, medical conditions, whether fever or anything, they must be screened for a simple, non-invasive blood pressure measurement. This is my humble request to all medical practitioners. Thank you, sir.
Rajshekhar. Thank you. Dr. Pancholia?
All the physicians should be aware of the hypertension and should plan the treatment accordingly. And there should not be any physician inertia for the managing the hypertension in the clinical scenario.
Yes. Last word from Chennappan.
The most important aspect of the hypertension treatment is taking blood pressure yourself with a good apparatus, correct apparatus, with the correct technique, and by yourself. That is the first step in managing hypertension. Correctly record the blood pressure and learn to record the blood pressure correctly by yourself, and don't depend upon others' blood pressure in the treatment of hypertension. So that should be the first message for the day.
Okay, thank you. My last word, I request all of you to be very active in the webinar as well as WhatsApp groups. And as I requested you, go back, buy 3 different cup sizes, and also promote home blood pressure monitoring, get a validated BP apparatus, or renew periodically. With this, I again remind you, tomorrow 9 p.m. we are going to meet and then talk about the pathogenesis of hypertension, both primary and secondary. The same panel will continue, and the speaker will be Chennappan, and I will be the moderator to do this. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please post those questions in our WhatsApp group. And before tomorrow, all these questions will be answered by Rajshekhar, Pancholia, Atul Bali, Ahmed Vakur, and myself, Chennappan. So thank you for your patience hearing up to 10:30, 10:40. And I thank IPCA for organizing and supporting this program. And IPCA also has promised all of you a BP app. They will provide you a BP app, and we will do the judging, and whoever wins the home blood pressure monitoring, we will deliver it to your place. And you will have to be actively involved, come on time, take part in the discussion, and attend all the 10 webinars. And as I said, after this 10 webinars, again, we'll have another course of hypertension webinars. Throughout the year, we'll have an active hypertension webinars. And by the next year, I have to see more than 100 people at least to take the hypertension specialists or hypertension clinics. Swami Vivekananda said 100 youngsters. I want 100 youngsters taking this hypertension also and win the battle. So thank you very much. Thank you, IPCA. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Johnny and team. And thank you, Dr. Rajshekhar, Pancholia, Dr. Atul Bali, Dr. Bakar Ahmed, and of course, Dr. Chennappan. Meet you tomorrow. Until then, good night. Take care. Stay safe. And salute to the COVID warriors.